Monaco is this tiny nation, nestled on the southern coast of France. You've probably heard of it. Fancy casinos, yachts, a playground for the rich. But what a lot of people don't realize is how wild it is that Monaco even exists today. I mean, it's tiny. Just look at it on the map. And here's the thing. During the early modern and modern periods, there was a massive push across Europe to unite people who spoke the same language under one nation. You know, the whole nationalism movement. But somehow, Monaco, this little dot between France and Italy, managed to dodge that whole wave of conquest and nationalism and stayed independent. How? How is Monaco still standing, surrounded by these bigger nations? That's what we're going to dive into today. So, let's go way back to the 13th century when Monaco first popped up as its own independent entity. The House of Grimaldi, the family that's been ruling Monaco for centuries, had one major goal. Don't get conquered. I mean, that's pretty much the only goal you'd need if you're running a tiny territory surrounded by much bigger and stronger powers, right? So, how'd they pull it off? Well, they had a pretty smart strategy. They placed themselves under the protection of much more powerful neighbors. First, it was Genoa, then later France, and for a while, even Spain. They played this balancing act where they promised to be loyal to whoever was protecting them at the time. But as soon as that protection wasn't convenient or another stronger neighbor came along, Monaco's rulers were like, okay, now we're loyal to you. It was all about survival. Things really kicked off in the early 17th century. Monaco's rulers switched sides, approaching the French king and saying, hey, how about you protect us now? And of course, the French king was all about it. Why? Because no self-respecting king of France would miss an opportunity to take something away from Spain, right? So, Monaco became a French protectorate, and that arrangement stuck for about 200 years. But as you probably know, things started to change when the French Revolution hit. All those new ideas about kings and governments, yeah, they didn't bode well for little monarchies like Monaco. In 1793, the French Republic straight up conquered Monaco and made it part of France. And this wasn't a quick thing. Napoleon came along, and Monaco was stuck as part of France through all of his crazy conquests. But when Napoleon eventually lost, the great powers of Europe, countries like Britain, Austria, and Russia, decided to restore Monaco's independence in 1814. So you'd think Monaco was back to being its own thing, right? Not quite. The King of Sardinia wasn't too happy about this new arrangement. He wanted more land, like most kings back then. So to keep him from getting too salty about it, the great powers made Monaco a protectorate of Sardinia the very next year, in 1815. Here's where it gets interesting. Making Monaco a protectorate of Sardinia is actually what saved it from being swallowed up by another country. Sardinia had bigger plans. They were focused on uniting Italy, and they saw Monaco as a puppet state. It wasn't worth the hassle to conquer it outright. In 1848, Europe was going through a lot of revolutions. People rising up, overthrowing monarchies, demanding change, and Monaco wasn't immune. Monaco had its own revolution, and most of the country actually broke away. Eventually, that part became a separate protectorate of Sardinia. But even then, Sardinia didn't annex these lands outright. Why? Well, they didn't want to upset France. See, France had its eyes on the region, and Sardinia needed France's support in their battles against Austria. So, to keep things chill, Sardinia let France take the lands that had broken away from Monaco. And what could Monaco's prince do about it? Nothing, really. He just had to accept that most of his country was gone, and there wasn't much he could do to stop it. At this point, France could have easily annexed what was left of Monaco too. But here's where the political game comes into play. Napoleon III, who was running things in France at the time, didn't want to give the other great powers of Europe any reason to oppose him. All these countries had agreed that Monaco should remain independent after the whole Napoleonic Wars mess, and Napoleon III didn't want to stir up trouble. So France let Monaco remain independent barely, but they didn't push to annex the rest of it. But here's the real kicker. Monaco had lost most of its land, so it needed to figure out another way to survive. And that's when they came up with two brilliant ideas: gambling and later some, let's say, creative financial accounting. The Monte Carlo casino became famous, attracting people from all over Europe who wanted to gamble without paying taxes. Monaco became a tax haven, which brought in even more money. But there's always a catch, right? In the 20th century, things got a little tense between Monaco and France over all this dodging of taxes. In the 1960s, French President Charles de Gaulle wasn't too thrilled about how French citizens were using Monaco to avoid paying taxes. He even went so far as to close the border between France and Monaco. The Prince of Monaco panicked. He thought de Gaulle was about to annex his country for real this time. But instead of going down that road, they made a deal. Monaco agreed to clamp down on French citizens dodging taxes, and in return, France backed off. That's how Monaco managed to keep its independence, even in the modern era. They didn't challenge France's interests, and in return, France didn't mess with them. So, why does Monaco still exist today? How did it avoid becoming part of France or Italy when so many other small states got swallowed up? The answer is a combination of smart political maneuvering, timing, and a bit of luck. Monaco played the game well, always aligning itself with more powerful neighbors for protection. And when the great powers of Europe decided it should remain independent, Monaco was careful not to do anything that would upset that balance. Even when they lost most of their land and faced financial struggles, they found new ways to survive, whether it was through gambling or tax havens. Monaco's story is one of survival against the odds. This tiny country, which could have easily been conquered or annexed at any point in history, managed to stay independent by playing its cards right. It's a fascinating example of how even the smallest nations can hold their own in a world dominated by bigger powers. So next time you think of Monaco as just a place for the rich and famous, remember its long and complicated history of survival and independence. It's not just a playground for the wealthy, it's a nation that's been fighting to stay alive for centuries, and that's why Monaco still exists today.